Yep, thank you. Wow, that's a long CV. I've been around a while. By the way, that coffee, I didn't realize the kind of coffee it was. I thought it was just a little espresso, but it's very sweet. Yeah, it's a very Miami thing. We're going to talk about the web browser today. So this is the most widely deployed application on the planet. 5 billion users. It's probably the most widely deployed application in most of your enterprises. But you guys don't think of it as an enterprise grade application, right? You think of it as it's not. It's a consumer grade. It's built for consumers. It showed up one day in an operating system and we just started using it. I think it was Windows 95 plus. We got exposed to Internet Explorer, and maybe if you guys were using some of the earlier browsers before that. But not a lot has changed. And what happens when we bring it into the enterprise is we end up doing something like this. And this is probably what a lot of your networks and a lot of your systems look like, because now we have to surround this browser. We have to treat it like a caged animal, because the data, that's where all the data is. That's where your important applications are. That's the interface to all of your cloud consoles. We moved to the cloud because we trust this thing called SSL and TLS. We said, yeah, we can move this up to the cloud. It's nice and secure. We trust they're going to take care of the data and so forth. But when that data travels from the cloud, it finally makes its way through your network, through your systems, through your desktop. It goes into your browser. And today, Chrome and Edge decrypt that traffic. And that's the very end of that conversation. But then from there, it goes anywhere it wants, right? So you might have PII, PCI, some sensitive data. It just leaks out. Chrome doesn't stop it from leaking out. In fact, you can cut, copy, paste anything you want out of Chrome and put it on your desktop and so forth. And so we had to do this. We had to do stuff at the periphery. We had to surround the browser with DLP and EDR and XDR and SASE networks and ZTNA and all these things. In fact, if you think about what a ZTNA network does, it's really cool technology, but we're sitting, again, outside the browser. We're taking this whole network stack and pushing it up to the cloud somewhere, and now we have to break and inspect it. We have to open up the TLS, open up the SSL, see what's inside of it, and really just to figure out what category this user is going to, right? It's a silly thing when you think about it, because the browser already knows. And the browser already has that decryption, right? Because that's its job. It's already decrypted that data. So when we think about all the activities, even like DLP, we might have DLP agents sitting at the OS level. And this was great. We needed this back when we were worried about a file from the C drive getting into the USB drive, right? And now these DLP agents, they're just waiting for something to fall out of the browser. But what if the browser doesn't let it, right? What if we can contain it with policy? And that's what we've built with Island, including the networking. So having the networking built into the browser. Turn to other technologies. We might do all of this and then stick it into a VDI, stick it into desktop as a service, right? So now we have Windows up there streaming down to another Windows desktop. Both of them have agents, and both of them have all these things around it. We really just need the browser to behave better. Nobody loves their VDI or desktop as a service experience, right? But the browser is so much more natural. It's so much more natural just to click on a button and go directly to that web property, go directly to that internal application that you have hosted. In fact, we can even stream the thick client applications back into the browser. That you have all of your apps in one place. It becomes a workspace. And for the first time, you log into this workspace. It's pretty crazy to think that today you don't log into your browser. You log into everything else. You need badged into the parking garage and your office and every application on your desktop, but not the browser. So today with Island, obviously, you link that to your SSO, link it to your IDP. You have to get authenticated. We know who you are. We know where you are, right? We know the device you're using. The browser can determine that. And so it really opens up a different way to think about providing maybe a desktop or access for a contractor, access for BYO or work from home or temporary worker. So we started this company about 4 years ago. Mike and Dan, these are our leaders. Mike is a former executive with Symantec, and he has a wealth of knowledge in the security space. Dan Amiga had a company called Fireglass, and it was about remote browser isolation. That's not what this is. This is an actual browser built on Chromium, downloaded locally. The policy sits local. It had to be hardened. We had to make sure it was. That's actually a little bit old. We just had a new funding. We've taken $460 million in the last 4 years to build a browser. That's a lot. And for the first time, you're going to get support for a browser. It's interesting to think that you don't get support today from Microsoft and Google on your most important business critical application. right? So who do you turn to when an update breaks applications, right? We can help with that, right? We have a staff. We actually have more developers on Island than Microsoft has on Edge, and more than Google has on the Chrome browser. We have a fantastic support group. We have gotten the attention of Gartner. They think this is the future endpoint for work. When you think about end user compute, you think about delivering these applications in an easy way. What's easier than a browser, right? And we think of, especially when it sits maybe on a thin OS, because now we've abstracted all of those layers, right? So instead of having all the ZTNA networks and the VPNs and the SASEs and the CASBs, take all those out, or you can still use them. We work great with them, right? So if you love your Zscaler and you love your Palo, Prisma, and all of this, great. We can actually help you do that even better. For instance, to support a BYO use case, somebody will have to put a certificate on their operating system and then route them through a proxy. Not a lot of people want to do that on a BYO. But we can actually contain that certificate in the browser, and the browser becomes the only way for them to egress through Zscaler or Palo or whatever it might be. And then when they're done with work, they close the browser and they go back to shopping on Edge or whatever they were doing. We have a lot of great ratings from our Gartner peer review folks. These are CIOs and CISOs. I encourage you to check this out. We don't fit into any one category on the Gartner thing. There's not a magic quadrant for the browser, but we are in the SASE category, so feel free to take a peek at us there. We built it on Chromium, and of course Chromium is fantastic. It's got plenty of features. Everybody knows how to use it. There's no training. There's no learning curve. If you've used a computer in the last 20 years, you've used a browser. But then we've added in enterprise-grade controls, and this is where it gets interesting. So as soon as you log in, you get a policy with your applications, everything that you can do within those applications. And of course, with this, we have to also think about where the data goes. So we built the DLP into the browser. So the moment that data is decrypted, the moment it goes from secure to insecure, that's when we can start putting protections around it. So let's say you're delivering Salesforce to a staff, and some of that data in there is sensitive. You don't want your Salesforce data leaving Salesforce, but yet you have to have these remote workers. So you give them the browser. The browser becomes the only way to get to Salesforce, thanks to conditional access or through Okta sign-on policy or Okta authentication policy or whatever your IDP might be. But that's the way that they're compelled to get in. They have to use the Island browser. And then from there, we can take that data and say, now you can copy and paste it, sure, but you can't paste it outside of Salesforce. Or you can't take a screenshot. So because of DRM tied into all the operating systems now, we can tell the browser not to let you take a screenshot. So you might do Command-Shift-3 on the Mac or the snipping tool in Windows. None of that works because that data is protected. We can even watermark things, right? So you have control if there's a sensitive report. Getting to somebody's eyeballs is risky, right? As soon as that data shows up, that's risky. And they could get their camera phone out and they could take a picture of it and post it on Twitter. And so if their watermark is on it with their name all over the screen, they're going to be less inclined to do that, most likely. And of course, just taking the data right off the screen, that's a possibility. Because for the first time, we have control over the presentation layer. And nobody's done this before. Nobody's altered the presentation layer on a browser. It sounds a little scary, right? We don't want to break a web page or break something. So the way we've built the browser is to look for that type of data to come in. And if we see it's a credit card number, a social security number, or something sensitive, we might want to just blank it out. We might want to just gray it out or blur it or take it off the screen altogether, or maybe require a two-factor before they could see it, or maybe get a manager approval. You just really start to rethink what the interface is. And when you have the browser and we have that control, when you do it the moment it's decrypted, you no longer have to worry as much about the periphery. Now, we're not saying get rid of your CrowdStrike or your local protection. We still need that. Here at Island, we have CrowdStrike and we have Island. That's it. And if we go into Island, we try to get to a property, it says you don't have CrowdStrike installed, you can't get there. So we can do that device posture check from within the browser itself. So lots of stuff that we've built into it. And we do sit in the center, of course everybody has a Venn diagram, we do sit in the center of cybersecurity and the end user experience. We don't want to disrupt any of that, right? In fact, we actually improve the user experience by giving them things like a password manager, a full-featured password manager built into the browser, one that's not an extension. Extensions generally are not that safe. They can be trumped by other extensions. They don't know anything about the device posture, right? But we've built this into the browser so that those passwords are injected in a way that they can never be saved in a Chromium-based password store, which just basically sits locally, almost in plain text in the browser. So anyway, lots of security upgrades. The business loves it because they can now do full audits. They have full compliance. You have every click, every keystroke, every screenshot that anybody did in those key applications. And then you have privacy for the times you need it, because it's tough to do that. It's tough to, when we're breaking and inspecting all this traffic with our current tools today, which, by the way, that's not going to last forever, right? With TLS 1.3, with perfect forward secrecy, maybe quantum when it comes out, you're going to have to be at the browser. It's not going to work over the network at line speed, right? And it's doing okay today. We can probably get 70% of the traffic decrypted today. But again, we don't need to do that in the browser because we're naturally decrypted, right? This is our platform. We've put a lot into it, as you can tell. Everything, those are all features up there. These could probably be companies by themselves. That's all built into the browser. We support all the operating systems, Windows, Linux, Mac, Chrome OS, iPad OS, iOS. So we got it on the mobile phones as well, and the tablets. Let's just pick one here. Ad blocker. Great. Has a nice ad blocker in it. That's cool. We have RPAs. We can do robotic process automation now. So how does that work in a browser? If you, let's say, we had a use case where somebody had it logging into Splunk, for instance, and maybe the user doesn't need to show all the search history right away. Or how about this one? They go to delete 20 virtual machines inside of AWS. That could take down the business. So maybe before they hit that delete button, we have another step they have to go through. And the browser is that thing that can sit in between you and disaster and make sure that doesn't happen. Phishing is another good example. I just listened to the Mandiant talk. That was really cool. But the phishing attacks that we're getting, these are horrible. And so what is the knee-jerk reaction to prevent phishing attacks? It's generally to go get an email scanner. So we buy these expensive email scanners, which are great. That's great. But that's not where phishing happens. Phishing happens in the browser. It's after you click that. Browser opens up, you get to the phishing site, you start putting in your company credentials, and maybe it's a browser-in-browser attack, maybe it's a man in the middle. They've captured your session token, they get your cookie, they've already reset your two-factor. By the way, you're logged in. You get fully logged in and authenticated. You don't have any idea what just happened because you still get your session token briefly until it expires after they reset it. But at the browser level, we know what site you're on all the time. So if you start putting a corporate credential into an unknown website, one that maybe hasn't made its way into the categories that we know is a bad website, we'll say, hang on, why are you putting corporate creds into an unknown site? Let's stop and look at this. This may be a phishing attack, right? So anyway, that's the kind of stuff we can do. We're sitting in a very unique position having this capability, and we've got some really great success stories. 3 of the 4 largest banks in America are rethinking their entire end-user compute strategy. We have the largest airline in the world as a customer. All of the developers for that airline use Island all around the world. That's their only way into Azure, GCP, OCI, and AWS. With the largest hotel chain in the world, Marriott. If you checked into a Marriott, there was an Island browser that checked you into that Marriott. Over 660,000 endpoints for the hotel. So we have some really of course, over 200 customers, all leaders of their industry. They're seeing the light. We've only been selling for 2 short years. But when a CIO sees this, when a CISO sees this, really changes everything. That used to be our old tagline, by the way. Sometimes changing one thing changes everything. Because it's true. Instead of this massive, crazy stack that we've created, let's simplify it. Let's put it in the browser and have the browser become that portal for your work. I think this is the last slide. This kind of represents some of the use cases that we see over and over again. VDI reduction is a big one, right? So we see a lot of folks that want to rethink their VDI strategy, especially when 80% of the applications inside of the VDI could potentially just be web apps. In fact, it's sad to say that the most popular application to deliver through Citrix and VMware and AWS workspaces today is Chrome. That's the most popular app to deliver. It's probably the most expensive way to deliver Chrome and surf the web, right? So in a lot of cases, we're not taking out VDI altogether, but when you start using less and less of the VDI and stream only the applications you need, now you've got an 85% less bill from these VDI vendors and desktop as a service. So what else? The critical SaaS apps, the critical web apps. So those are the Office 365s of the world, the Workdays, the Salesforce, apps that you don't really have control over, but they have your data and you need to keep it safe. They're keeping it safe up there. You need to keep it safe down here and make sure it doesn't leak out, and that's what the browser can do. Zero trust. We are often called a zero trust browser. Because now for the first time, yes, you can provision a contractor Teams and Slack or whatever, and maybe one other thing, maybe your key application. They don't need a full VDI desktop. They don't need to be linked in to your network at all times, snooping around and access to other applications that they don't need. They just need those two things. So now you can deliberately give them those two things and a secure portal. Maybe you don't let them download from Teams, but they can do all the collaboration they want, but they just can't take the files. So anyway, lots of good use cases. I'll be here for a little while. Obviously, would love to answer any other questions or some questions. Do we have time for a question? Does anybody have a question? Yes, in the back.
On the browser, do you have like a database that uses this data in the column? Say, for example, a user, username and password. Do you have a database that sits behind this browser?
Yeah, the question was, do we have a database that sits behind the browser? In a number of ways, yes. We have all the web categories, for instance, that's in a database. We get that from Bright Cloud like everybody else. So the web categorization's there. We can also do privileged access management, inserting things like shared passwords without the user ever being able to see what that shared password is. Because we had to harden this browser. We had to make sure it was secure, tamper-proof. You can't break into the browser, right? Stealing session cookies, passwords in Chromium, all of those things. We had to tighten that up. So yes, we also have the Cloud Console, which is the policy engine, and I think that's probably where your question was coming from. So that's the policy engine in the cloud.
So what about in terms of like sensitive data within that database? Can that information be accessed or can that protect behind that browser and protect that data? Make sure that sensitive data is obfuscated?
Yeah, we can make sure the sensitive data is obfuscated. Yeah, absolutely. And of course, if we're capturing logs, if we're capturing screenshots that might have sensitive information in the screenshot, these are things you can store in your cloud, right? In your storage as well. It doesn't have to be in the island storage. I think we're done. Thanks so much, everybody.